I'm Cameron Hipp, a junior broadcast journalism major at the University of South Carolina. This event was organized by SABU's Educators Committee, which includes faculty from several journalism schools throughout the country. Today, we'll be talking with recent graduates who not only landed impressive internships, they converted those internships into full-time jobs in the same newsroom. Our panelists today are Hardika Singh, markets reporter at the Wall Street Journal, Spencer Brewer, staff writer at the Dallas Business Journal, and Yeji Lee, cannabis and psychedelics industries reporter at Business Insider. Hardika, Spencer, and Yeji, thank you for joining us today. We'll start today's panel by giving each of you a chance to tell us more about you and your career so far. In particular, can you tell us a bit about how you chose to pursue journalism as a career and share with us the places you've worked so far? Hardika, if you'd like to start, you can.
Sure, thank you so much. So I grew up in India and I was very curious right from the start. I had a very outgoing personality, so journalism was just a right match. As for figuring out a passion for business journalism, I tried a bunch of different beats, and the only one that stuck with me a lot was business journalism. So I decided to, continue challenging myself in it. And as for the places I've worked at, obviously I worked for the school newspaper, as I would recommend anybody. I worked for a local broadcast TV station. I worked for another part of the school as a communications specialist as well, doing small business reporting. I interned at Bloomberg, covering equities last summer, and this summer I did Wall Street Journal and got a job here.
Wow, thank you. Spencer, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. So hello, everybody. My name is Spencer. Similar to Hardik said, I was always just kind of curious, right? And I always enjoyed writing. It seems to me that journalism is the only career where I get to do both. I have a pretty short resume. I worked at my student newspaper, the Shorthorn, and then I interned at the Dallas Business Journal twice, and then about 3 months ago, transitioned to a full-time role.
Great. And Yeji?
Sure. So I feel like my route to journalism is a little bit different from Hardika and Spencer's. I realized really late that I wanted to be a journalist. And so I was an English major. I had zero interest in journalism all throughout undergrad. And then my junior year of college, I ended up getting an internship at a literary magazine because I'd won an essay competition. Before that, I just knew nothing about journalism. I wasn't particularly interested in media or anything like that. But, that experience sort of made me think oh, this is something that I could actually do, and I could write and get money at the same time. That's cool. And so then after that, I did internships at a few different, really, really small startup organizations that nobody would recognize the names of. And I thought, if I really want to do this as a career, I need an edge. So I decided to go to grad school and then intern at a few other places after that before landing my job.
Well, thank you all of y'all for telling us more about yourself. And then this next question is just for you, Hardika. While in school, you gained experience in various types of communications, PR, advertising, and journalism. How did you ultimately choose journalism and why? How have the other experiences with PR and advertising helped your journalism?
That was a good question. I had to think back on my 4 years and look at where I've gone through. For me, I was mostly sure that I was going to end up in journalism, but PR was sort of like a second option, I'd say. It's very similar to journalism. You do a lot of the same things, writing, to some extent reporting and coordinating with people. So for me, I got to try to see, get a little bit of experience in both of them. And luckily, I found a job in journalism, so I didn't have to venture out into the PR field. So it worked out for me. But for my school, I did this competition through PRSSA, which is another great organization. And it was about campaigning. And it surprisingly taught me a lot about data reporting because I was a data analyst for our campaign about the census. So I got to see really good stats, make some cool charts, and we love charts, right? So I got to see all those things and use it to my benefit in job applications, right? that I don't just look at numbers and report on them. I can also, look at those numbers, analyze them, and find out what's the story there. So that was a great benefit. I also would like to add that I worked as a sports reporter for a little bit for our local TV station. And again, it's not related to business journalism at all, but you can say it to recruiters and highlight that, you're able to learn new topics on the go. And as long as you're gaining skills, it doesn't matter where you get them from, right? As long as you can prove that you're going to be able to use them in some way or another. So for me, it was just figuring out where I wanted to be at and how I would get there. And business journalism is one of those things.
Okay, and then this next question is for Spencer. How did your previous experience, both on campus and in professional newsrooms, prepare you for your internship in Dallas?
Sure. So at my university, my student publication is called The Short. And our newsroom advisor is named Lori Fox. And according to the Lori Fox School of Journalism, the most important question that a journalist can ever answer is why. We could take any given series of events, really trying to find out why something is happening. And, that being kind of inculcated in me at an early age, I think helped me gain the experience that I was able to leverage into a full-time role. Any given situation that I found myself, whether it was in my student publication or in an internship setting, I found it really valuable to, sit next to the black belt, so to speak. And what I mean by that is to find the people that really seem like they know what they're doing. I think everyone kind of has their own different process for journalism, their own different way of doing things. But I found that it's incredibly valuable to me to find people that are incredibly experienced, ask them, hey, how do you take notes? How do you prepare for an interview? What's your story writing process? And so those experiences, either through my student publication and later my internship, really helped kind of grow my horizon, so to speak. And then lastly, I think taking an editing position at my student newspaper was incredibly helpful. Just being able to see from when it was first thought up to finally publish, the whole lifespan of that process kind of gave me a different way of looking at my own writing. And I think that's super valuable. Wants to learn how to do this thing for a living.
And then Yeji, when it comes to learning fundamentals of journalism and business journalism in particular, how much did you learn in the classroom and how much are you learning on the job?
Yeah, so I basically did not take any business journalism classes in grad school. I just did not think that business journalism was for me, but my ultimate goal for getting into journalism in the first place was because I wanted to go back to Korea as a foreign correspondent. And the more that I looked at the bureaus there and the reporters and what they were covering there, I began to realize that, it probably made more sense to go back as a business journalist rather than someone who covered politics or something else. And so I basically learned all my stuff on the job. At first, it was at a trade publication. And then it was at Insider, and it just really helped that I had an editor who was really just willing to walk me through everything from, reading financial filings to, how to talk to company executives and how that's different from talking to regular people. So yeah.
Okay, so this next question is going to be a little bit different. Everyone is going to answer, and it's going to be a quick 60-second response. So Hartika, if you want to start us out, the question is, name one thing you did during the application process to land you in the maybe yes pile compared to the no pile.
Yes. So one thing I would do in my resume was quantify my work instead of just saying, I used to write weekly for Bloomberg News. I would say I wrote 4 to 5 daily stories for Bloomberg News, which amounted to a total of, let's say, 200 plus. So if you quantify your work, it gives recruiters a better idea of, your skills and your experiences.
Spencer.
Sure. So I think something that was really valuable for me was reaching out to people at publications responsible for recruitment. not even necessarily if I was planning on trying to intern at that specific publication, but just reaching out to people and being like, hey, what for a candidate? What is your ideal candidate? How, what do you want to see on a resume? What do you want to see in a cover letter? And then kind of tailoring my own resume and cover letter based on what they told me.
And Yaji?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference between my resume and cover letter before, when I wasn't getting a lot of responses to, when they actually started getting some responses in interviews, was I started pivoting my cover letter from, I'd love to work at your publication. I love you guys and what you guys are doing so much. I went from that to here's what I've done so far and here's the value that I can add to your publication. And I feel like that sort of shift in mindset really helped me get into the maybe yes pile as opposed to before, because I feel like before my thought was, if I could work at this place, that would be amazing. They'd be doing me such a big favor, but companies don't do favors for employees, right? They'll only really hire you if they think they think you'll add value to them. So I feel like shifting your mindset from like the student mindset where you just really want to get into, here's what I can add. I think that is definitely something that helped me get to where I am today.
Thank you. Those tips were really helpful. And now we're back to you, Hardika. What was your approach to finding and applying for internships? Did that change from year to year as you gained more experience?
Yeah, so my situation was a little bit different because I needed sponsorship. So I started a year early before my graduation date, as I would recommend everybody to do. So you can, really get out in the field and start networking, bring yourself in attention to all these recruiters and editors so they know when you're graduating. They can, if they post any jobs, they can let you know and things like that. At first, during the first 4 or 5 months, a lot of my job search was very limited, I'd say. I was only applying to the places where I thought I'd have a shot or I'd, actually be able to work at, where I thought I'd hear back for an interview. So I was saying no to myself before other people could, and that was not a good call on my part. So what I started doing after that was, applying to any and all places that I would see, even if the experience required was like, 4+ years or 5+ years. I didn't care. I was just applying. And I noticed a change. I was hearing back from a lot more places despite not having the experience. And I think it's just one of those things where, you can't say no to yourself before other people say to you. So you just got to apply, put out as many applications as possible. But at the same time, I don't want to discount the fact that, having a very narrow strategy can work for some people. It just didn't work out for me in the beginning. So I had to, tailor my approach a little bit differently for these media organizations.
I think that's really important to remember. So thank you for sharing that. And then for Spencer, do you have any tips for students applying to internships about resumes, cover letters, and clips?
Sure. So I will say that there are a whole bunch of people that are way more knowledgeable about how to format a resume, what all goes into it, and all that good stuff. I know many universities have some have departments dedicated to just helping students format their resume, format their cover letter. So first of all, take advantage of those. As far as specific tips, though, I would say have everyone in your life read it and go over it with you. So I remember, again, back when I was a student journalist, everyone in my publication would gather around internship season because every has a due date within a week of each other. So we'd all share our resumes with each other and our cover letters with each other. And I found that to be just incredibly helpful. And then any kind of professional contacts I had, again, not necessarily at publications that I was trying to work for, just people that I had met at former alumni of my student publication. I send them my resume and be like, hey, what do you think about this? How could I improve this? And as far as clips go, I would say that, tailor it to the publication, as has been said. But more than that, I found it helpful, and talking to other folks, I found it helpful as well, showing kind of a breadth of work. And what I mean by that is, showing a breaking news story, an in-depth feature, something investigative, showing a recruiter that you can think on your feet, you can cover a variety of different things in a variety of different ways. I think that is incredibly valuable to getting in the door.
Yeji, you've also had varied experience in communications. When applying for internships and jobs, how do you address the different experience in your applications?
Yeah, so I feel like that's definitely changed the more experience I got. But like I said before, all the internships I had before grad school, they're all at really, really tiny publications, which meant that I had to wear a lot of hats. I was writing and editing and doing social media, none of them particularly well, because I wasn't trained in anything, but I was doing everything. So I think once I had those experiences, I really tried to market myself as somebody who had worn a lot of hats and, understood what it was like to work at a modern media company where a journalist is sort of expected to do everything. So I put a big emphasis on the fact that I could go into any role and sort of figure it out. And that's sort of how I presented myself. But I think the more that I had internships in publications where people would actually recognize the names, that became less of a thing that I had to do. And I could more so focus on the articles that I wrote and the work that I was doing.
Okay, this is another question for all of you. So name one thing you did during your internship that made you stand out. Hardik, if you'd like to start.
Yeah. So one thing I did was obviously like asking your manager a bunch of questions, even if they're really dumb. Obviously, if you can figure them out by Googling, don't ask your manager that question. But sometimes I couldn't figure out things even after I Googled them. So I had to ask. Another thing to keep in mind is that you need to have really specific goals to show that you're improving, because in an internship where you only have 10 weeks, you have a very short amount of time to show that you could come to the company in the future and do great work for them. And the best way to do that, I figured out, is by having weekly calls with your manager and setting up very specific goals. So something along the lines of, let's say, I will pitch 3 stories every week and make sure this many of them get turned into stories, or I'll get in touch with this many people. I'll churn out 4 stories a month or something like that. So as long as you have specific goals, you can show to your manager that, you were either in line, exceeded expectations or missed. And, those are one of the things that will stand out at the end of your internship, which you can talk about to, other people and kind of brag like, hey, I exceeded all my goals. So hopefully my manager calls me back. So always good to have goals.
And Spencer?
Sure. So kind of going off on my point, I think editors tend to be very busy people. I found it helpful to like religiously pursue feedback. Even, I tend to think of editors as like they've got a full plate. They, aside from just editing, they're in there, they've got meetings, they've got budgeting, all that good stuff. And so oftentimes they won't give you feedback unless you ask for it. I found it incredibly helpful to ask for that feedback and then take it and try to apply it to my work going forward. That's something that when I speak to them about, okay, like what stood out to you about me, that's one thing they mentioned.
Yeji?
Yeah, I think I want to piggyback off Hardika's point about the pitching. Basically, my editor and I had weekly catch-ups, and every single time we had a catch-up, I would pitch like 5 different stories. A lot of them were bad, but I did pitch 5, and chances are if you're pitching 5, at least 1 will be good. And I think I did that because I really just wanted to show that I had ideas in a different angle that I could bring to the cannabis team at Insider. At the time and still now, it's just me and one other colleague, and he's the one who sort of built up the beat at Insider. But I think I just wanted to show that this beat needs 2 people with different ideas coming at it from different angles. And, I think that's something that I really, really tried to show to my editors throughout my fellowship. And also one thing that I didn't realize was different in business journalism than more general reporting that I had done in grad school was how many PR people and companies actually reach out to you first, especially in a smaller industry. And so I basically took every single call that was offered to me, and a lot of them weren't very useful, but some of them really were, and they sort of helped me build relationships with sources that have been really, really helpful at giving me scoops and different information that I would have never gotten elsewhere.
Okay, and we're back to Harnika. How important is it to have business-specific experience to get an entry-level job in business journalism? How can students get that experience before they graduate?
I've seen cases where students didn't have any business-specific journalism, but got a job in business journalism. And I am one of the cases where I had experience and then got a job. So I really don't think there's like a super clear answer. From what I understand, a lot of it is about what passion you have for it. If you can prove, you can learn this very complex topic in a short amount of time and report on it and keep up with it, I think you're in a good position to get it. As for where you can find that experience, obviously like working for the student newspaper, but I understand not each and every school has that. So if you can't work for it, I'm sure you can find some department in your school where there's a need for a business communication specialist, even if it's like more PR oriented job. As long as you're getting writing experience, you're in a good spot to advocate for yourself when it comes to, the application season. So yeah, just try to write as much as you can.
Okay, so Spencer, at what point did you start thinking about business journalism? How did that come about and why?
Yeah, so basically, as I was kind of a wee student journalist and reporting on my team and my community, again, always taught to value like why things are happening, right? And so as I started exploring it, really kind of getting in depth in like local issues, I found that a lot of reasons why, and this is going to be very much an overgeneralization, but a lot of times it came down to money. And I think exploring how kind of business shaped my community and my university was something that was always just really interesting to me. And so it wasn't something that I knew from day one that I was going to do, but it was something that I was curious about. And then when I got the opportunity to intern at the Dallas Business Journal, I kind of jumped at it.
Yeah, G, what emerging topics, like for instance, cannabis, present possible job opportunities for early career business journalists?
So I definitely feel like covering a small industry is very favorable to a new or young reporter, just because there are like 5 reporters covering the whole space. And so you're just bound to be one of the journalists that people know. I also think that as an international student, it was hard for me to imagine myself as a more general news reporter or breaking news reporter, just because there's so many more people more qualified than me to do that job. But if I really honed in on one really specific place and sort of made myself an expert on that industry, I'm less replaceable than somebody who, can cover everything and anything, right? And so I feel like that was personally really helpful for me just to land my fellowship, which eventually became a job. And also it sort of gives you a sense of you as a journalist maturing alongside the industries. Like the cannabis industry and the psychedelics industry 2 years ago were a lot smaller than they are now. So, I feel like that even helps out with sources, the fact that you've been around for a while considering, and they feel like you definitely understand how the industry has grown over the past few years. Definitely gives you a lot of credibility.
Yeah, I'd like to add that I was in a very similar spot to Yeji. I was also an international student, and well, I still am. And it's hard to just make yourself stand out using journal news. Also, I found journal news to be kind of sort of harder than business journalism. With business journalism, there's such a niche publications that you can just read some books and get a better idea. With journal news, you never know what you're going to be covering, and I didn't feel like super comfortable with that at base. Like I didn't know how to transition from doing politics to sports on like a 3-hour basis, which I'm sure many small publications require. So for me, business was a better fit, to make myself stand out, be specific, and it's kind of hard to do. So it's hard to find good people in it.
Yeah, thank you, Hartika, for jumping in. And then this next question again is for all of you. So if you just want to follow after each other, what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self, say the sophomore version of yourself? Hartika?
This one I didn't I didn't have to think too hard. Obviously, when you're doing a lot of things during school, a lot of people will not be so excited about it. They'll try to bring you down. They will say that you're working too hard. But I'd just like to add that you should not care, what other people think about you. You should just keep trending higher, because if I had stopped working hard in sophomore year, I wouldn't have landed at such a great publication. So just try to keep doing as many things as you possibly can in your 4 years to, get the most of your money and get the most advantages of the program.
I can go next. Sophomore version me had no idea she wanted to go into journalism. But if I were to give advice, I would say, I think because I never took any journalism courses as an undergrad, I didn't even understand how articles were put together and why this graph was here and this quote is here. So I feel like if I were to give advice to somebody who maybe has not taken a lot of journalism courses, I would say pick out a few journalists you really, really like. And try to dissect their articles, figure out why they put this here and that there. And I think once you sort of understand how everything fits in together, it really helps you understand, what are the components that make a good article. Also freelance more, definitely freelance more.
Okay, I'm assuming Spencer is having some technical difficulties, so I guess we'll just move on to Hartika. A question for you. What are the best ways to make connections with people in the field? How did you start to build a professional network during and after college?
So the way I look at professional networks is by just trying to think of a tree, right? If you connect to one branch, you can connect to 2 other branches. And then you can connect to 4, 8, and it just keeps on exponentially increasing from there. And suddenly you find yourself, you've connected to the entire tree. So if you connect to one right person, that person can connect you with other people who would be beneficial to you in your career. And a lot of the great folks I met, that was, exactly through that. So at the end of, one networking conversation with people, I'd ask them, who are some of the other people that I should connect with in the industry to do whatever it is that you want to do? So for me, if it was to learn more about business reporting, I'd say, who else can I meet with who'd know, who'd be a great person to talk to about this? And then they'd connect me. And you have this talking point, which is like, oh, this person forwarded me to you. So tell me a little bit more. Would love to set up a chat. And then that way, they're more likely to be able to get back to you and read your email. And that's very important if you want to have a connection. So that was really good. Another great thing I did that I actually learned at Wall Street Journal from one of our recruiters. I was showing off to her in a way during midway through the internship. I was telling her, oh, I've connected with so many folks here at Wall Street Journal. It's so fantastic. I feel like I'm in a great shape. And she was like, make sure those connections are meaningful too. Maybe you should go back and chat with them all again. And I was like, that is very, very true. I should go back. And I think that really made the relationship much stronger, much more meaningful. And that's really what you're going for here anyway. So you should always try to, not only just connect with people, but also have quality relationships.
If I can add to Hardika's points, which 100% agree on all of them, I would say that I know a lot of people encourage students to reach out for coffees and informational sessions, which I think that works really, really well for some people. For me, I really didn't like doing that. I felt super awkward and I hated doing it. But what really helped me was joining just different journalism associations. I joined AAJA, the Asian American Journalists Association, and met through a mentorship program there, somebody who was in business journalism, was really great, gave me lots of great advice. And so I would say also that if I could just add anything.
Okay, and Spencer, what didn't you do as a student that you wish you would have because you feel it would have helped you with the job hunt or job preparation?
Sorry about that. My internet just cut out. I think first and foremost, something that I wish I had done or done earlier was networking more. I think, it is incredibly valuable to go meet people in the field, kind of gain some of that wisdom again, not necessarily to try to work at the publication they work for, but to get a sense of how they do things, how they operate, kind of do some knowledge diving with them. I will also say that I've found that quite a few journalists enjoy the idea of helping aspiring journalists out. So I found that more often than not, if I reach out, say cold call, send an email to just some journalists whose work I like, they tend to be pretty responsive and pretty willing to help.
Very few times have I had somebody who didn't want to talk to me when I was starting out. So always try to reach out. Again, don't say no to yourself before others do.
So going off what all three of you have kind of talked about, what do you think is the biggest tool for making connections? Like LinkedIn, reaching out in person, emailing them. What has been most helpful to you?
I can start us off. I just reach out to people over email. If I can find them on LinkedIn and I think that they're somewhat active, I'll do that as well. I'm not particularly fond of LinkedIn. I don't think it's as great as people talk about. I've never been able to connect with sources on there. Maybe it's just my beat is so niche that you can't find people on it. But yeah, I just reach out to them on email or text them, just set up a chat any way you can.
Definitely email. Excuse me. Yeah, definitely email. Any kind of events or conferences. We used to have a whole bunch at my university, and attending those things religiously is definitely helped me out.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, email. I've never reached out to anyone over Twitter DM, but since joining Insider and because Insider has so many positions open, I've actually gotten a lot of people reach out to me via Twitter. And unless Twitter DMs have that weird hidden message thing, they're pretty easy to spot. So I would say that as well, email and Twitter.
Okay, and then Yeji, a question for you. Is your current job different than what you were originally wanting to do? What advice do you have for students facing opportunities they either didn't expect or aren't sure that they are the right fit?
Yeah, so I cover cannabis and psychedelics, which I don't think anyone sort of in journalism school would think, oh yeah, I definitely want to cover cannabis and psychedelics, right? And for me, I spent my high school in South Korea. Those things are non-existent there pretty much. People just don't have much knowledge about it, and I didn't either. So it definitely was not something that I was expecting to cover. What ended up happening was I freelanced a few stories when South Korea ended up legalizing a really limited medical cannabis program. And then that landed me my internship at trade publication, which led me to Insider. I didn't think that I would like it, but I really, really do like my job, and I really do like what I'm covering. So I would say for any students who aren't really sure, I'd say try it. If you don't like it, kick it to the wayside. But definitely, I feel like just because you start out in one beat does not mean that you are stuck in that beat forever. And I feel like I see that a lot in just the fact that I'm getting a lot of recruiter messages on LinkedIn, and they're asking me if I'm interested in a position that has nothing to do with cannabis or psychedelics, right? It's just a matter of they know that I've been covering these industries for a long time, and that means I have skills that could very much transfer over into something else. So, I'd say try it out. Why not? You might end up liking it. And if not, you just have another year of experience.
So this next question is for all of you. So what would you like journalism students to know about covering business?
It's hard at first, but once you get into the groove of things, things kind of start to make sense. Obviously, there's a steep learning curve in the beginning, but the way I learned how to, work my way through it was by reading a lot of books, chatting with a lot of people who are working in the industry, and just asking them really silly questions. If you don't understand what break evens mean, you don't understand. So ask them how it works, Inflation is such a complicated topic and everybody's talking about it right now. So if you don't know how exactly it might impact consumers in their everyday life, ask people about it. And obviously we're journalists, so we should be comfortable with asking these questions and trying to understand these topics better so we can explain it to our readers in things that make more sense, right? So yeah, that'd be one of my tips about business journalism.
I think before I got into business journalism, I had this notion that was very dry and not very fun, but actually, like with any other kind of journalism, it's really the people you're talking to that make it interesting. And I think for me, like the only things that I really wanted in a job was I wanted to have a livable salary. I wanted to be able to write, and I wanted to be able to learn something, right? And journalism, and especially business journalism, I feel like for me ticked all those boxes. So yeah, it's not dry. Trust me.
If anybody says it's dry, don't talk to them anymore.
Yeah,
Business
don't
journalism
talk
is
to
the
them.
most fun beat out there. It's literally so interesting. You'll never get bored. There's a new beat to find every single day. You're done with the stock market, go learn about Forex. It's all new every day.
I would also add, if you like calling people out on their BS, and and if you like sort of like confronting people and calling them out on their BS, business journalism is also a very good place to do that. Like I can't, where else am I going to talk to millionaires and be like, you're wrong? Like that's BS. Tell me the truth, Steve. Like I can do it because I'm a journalist. I couldn't be able to do it anywhere else.
I guess kind of adding on to that, I will say, as others have said, it is so much more fun than I expected it to be. I mean, like, I don't know, it's way more than I expected it to be. And I also I like to make the point that the journalistic fundamentals stay the same. Kind of the process, the core mission of what you're doing really stays the same. And as others have said, like I used to view business reporters as like wizards with just this like insane depth of knowledge that I could never grasp. And the truth is that I find a lot of really patient people who are able to explain things to me. And from what I can tell, that's what a lot of other reporters do too. And so don't write it off because it seems intimidating or you aren't sure if it's for you. Give it a shot.
Well, that was our last question. So thank you so much for being able to answer all the questions and just kind of give us an insight in where a lot of us students are about to be transitioning from internships to full-time jobs. Because personally, I really learned a lot from everything you were saying and kind of makes me feel more comfortable with going into the finding more internships and finding jobs. So thank you again for joining us. And I think that's it.